Welcome back to the morning show here on the Arise News channel. Well, joining us now from our Abuja studio is Senator Ita Enang, former Senior Special Assistant to the President on National Assembly Matters. Senator Enang, welcome to the morning show.
Good morning, Senator.
Thank you very much.
Well, Senator Enang,
Good morning. I'm now the Senior Special...
Yes, you said...
I'm now the Senior Special Assistant to the President on Niger Delta Affairs.
That is correct.
I'm now the Senior Special Assistant to the President on Niger Delta Affairs.
Niger Delta Affairs, yes. But, you know, this morning...
Thank you very much.
We may not talk about Niger Delta. We want to start first with the ruling of the Presidential Election Petition Tribunal on the February 23, 2018 presidential election.
2019.
Is it 2019? Yeah. No. Oh, 2019, this year. Yes, that's true. What's your take on the outcome of that process? President Buhari has been declared winner, you know, by that tribunal. And the PDP is saying this is a subversion of justice. But President Buhari has extended the hand of fellowship to the other party and to everybody. Governor Wike of the PDP has congratulated the president. Other persons have congratulated him. But it looks like the matter, as PDP has made clear, will go to the Supreme Court. You are a lawyer, primarily. You know, what do you think? What's your take? What are your thoughts?
Let me use this medium again to congratulate His Excellency Mr. President and the All Progressive Congress on the victory. And again, also join Mr. President in extending the hands of fellowship of the government to the PDP and all Nigerians to join hands and work toward the growth of Nigeria, because elections are over. It is now governance, and governance is for all. Let me say that the Election Petition Tribunal did one of the biggest jobs in this country. And the biggest job they did was to go in the greatest detail. I think this is one of the most detailed judgments ever in the history of election petitions in this country. They went addressing every and each of the issues that were raised. Again, let me congratulate the Nigerian media and thank them, because over 80 or 70% of the media houses covered and relayed the delivery of the judgment live as they were being delivered by the court. So that is why you found, I looked at the headlines, I looked at the social media, I looked at the analysis. The analysis has been informed, it's been educating, it's been on issues. So this is what the media has done, because if it was just delivered and they did not, most Nigerians did not have opportunity of hearing the reasoning of the judges on each of the issues, the ratio decidendi on each of the matters raised, the ruling on the side of Atiku, His Excellency Atiku Abubakar, the emeritus presidential candidate of the PDP, and the argument that were raised on behalf of President Buhari on the side of the APC. Now, they would have, they balanced it. They balanced their ruling on the preliminary issues and then before coming to the main issues. I think in all of this, Nigeria and Nigerians are the winners.
Now, Senator, you were the presidential advisor on National Assembly matters, and you acted as a liaison between the executive and the legislature, especially during with regards to the Electoral Amendment Bill, which the President declined his assent to 4 times. Can you take us through that process? What really happened there? And do you feel, like a lot of us do, that some of the petition, either the entire petition or at least parts of it, would not have arisen in the first case if that bill was made law? Do you also have any insights into the status of the bill now? Do you think that that should be a priority for the 9th National Assembly?
First, there is no bill as of today on electoral matter pending before Mr. President for assent. There is none. Second, upon the dissolution of the 8th Assembly on the 8th Assembly on June 8, 2019, every matter that pended or was in existence lapsed and no more exists. Thirdly, the president was right in declining assent to the electoral bills as they were then, because all the reasons were given. First, there is a difference between electronic voting and concurrent electoral transmission of results, and the card reader. And the learned justices of the Court of Appeal gave real reasons, quoting and latching on the reasons that were given in 2015 as they quoted the judgments of Justices Sentus Nweze and John Inyang-Okoro, Justices of the Supreme Court as they are. And all this were the matters that guided the president in taking those decisions that it is inappropriate to assent to electoral acts those electoral acts as they were. Finally, on this point, you remember one of the last reasons His Excellency Mr. President gave was that it will be, unless the National Assembly makes a law or changes the provision in that bill, as it were, that the provisions will come into effect after the 2019 elections, that it will be inappropriate to assent to it. And Mr. President gave his reason, and rightly, that it will not be appropriate and possible for the Electoral Management Body, the Independent National Electoral Commission, to bring into effect all the provisions, all that were necessary to effect the implementation of that act. And immediately it is assented to. The question of time or timing was not, didn't arise. It is law, it is law. You are bound by it. You either go into it or crash with it. You either drive with it or crash with it. So Mr. President said no. And again, there is this understanding or protocol on ECOWAS and Africa which prohibits the coming into force of a new electoral law 6 months to the date of the election. And of course, the attention of the National Assembly was drawn to this. Now, what does the National Assembly need to do now? I think the National Assembly has to take and listen to the entire judgment of the Supreme Court, of the Court of Appeal, and take account of every issue that the court raised. First, the National Assembly has to give value to itself. I want to apologize for using this word. I apologize the first time, and apologize the second time, I apologize the third time. The National Assembly has to give value to itself, that it is what they do that will mar or build the electoral process in this country. That the whole panel of 5 justices of the Court of Appeal would sit and deliberate on and say that this is what the law is. What is the law? It is what the National Assembly makes. Therefore, they have to take themselves and their role very, very, very seriously. They have to not just agree on what the consultants submit to them. They have to agree and personally be involved in the legislation on electoral matter. And finally, they should start it very early. They started the deliberation on the Electoral Act rather late. And so they passed the first one, it was deficient. They passed the second one, it had issues. They passed the third one, and they forwarded only part of it to Mr. President. And when they said, oh, this was there, I drew the attention to the fact that it wasn't there. And when that happened, they now came back, passed the correct one, and forwarded. And by the time they forwarded that, it was too close to election, and it was inappropriate to assent because it would be throwing the nation back into electoral quagmire. On the part of the executive, I want to say that I want to urge His Excellency Mr. President, the learned Attorney General and Minister of Justice of the Federation, the Independent National Electoral Commission, that it is time that they constitute a body, a little in-house body, to look at the Electoral Act as it is, look at the judgments as has been delivered, and await And I will encourage, with respect, sir, a lot of people may not agree with me on this, but I will say this as a lawyer. I will encourage the PDP to go to the Supreme Court so that whatever issues the Supreme Court will eventually come out with will be the final guide to the legislature and to the executive and to the body that I'm suggesting that could be put in place to fashion out an electoral system that will come into effect 2 years before the next election. By God's grace, His Excellency, Mr. President, will not be contesting the next election. So there is no question of any interest at all. It will be that the law, as will be put in place, will be the best. If Nigeria wants electronic voting, electronic transmission of results, the existence of server, and all issues relating to the new electoral process, it can be done if the law is passed 2 years or 3 into the electoral cycle. This is what I would suggest will come in place. If we wait, and I want to draw attention of this country, that in the last electoral, all the 3 or 4 electoral bills that were sponsored, although the executive had input on it, it was not an executive bill. And so the executive should take leadership on this matter and not allow a member of the Senate, a distinguished senator, or a member of the House of Representatives to introduce an electoral bill. It will be introduced, though, because members are free to introduce legislation. They should not allow it to be that it is a member that is introducing a bill on it, but let it be a bill that has been worked out, thought out, and assimilated, and all Nigerians heard in the entire process.
Well, Senator Enang, I mean, you've made very useful suggestions and you've defined follow-up actions for the legislature and the executive. But we'll take a short break. But when we return, I would like you to comment on specific fine points of law, you know, emerging from the ruling by the Court of Appeal in this particular matter, which may guide us and provide further education. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. You're still watching The Morning Show here on the Arise News channel. And still with us in our Abuja studio is Senator Ita Enang, Emeritus Senior Special Assistant to the President on National Assembly Matters, currently Senior Special Assistant to the President on Niger Delta Affairs. Senator Enang, before we went on break, I was asking you what are those fine points of law that you have seen in terms of contribution to our jurisprudence coming out of this ruling by the Court of Appeal on the matter between the PDP presidential candidate and incumbent President Muhammadu Buhari. You had referred earlier to this judgment being robust, comprehensive, you know, and you referred to the ratio in the matter. But what are those fine points of law that officers in the Temple of Justice can further focus on?
Well, I want to say that it was very lucid, erudite, comprehensive, and they went to the depth of jurisprudence and, in fact, went into the jurisdiction of jurisprudence. Now, what the court has determined, and my take is that drafting, legislative drafting, constitutional provisions, the legislature should be very, very careful, because the court still holds that it is the job of the legislature to make the laws, and it's the duty of the judiciary to interpret, and that they will interpret the law as it is. Look at the interpretation that the court gave on the question of qualification. He said he should have read up to school certificate. And was it a requirement that it should be attached? Agreed that not every word ought to be imputed into a legislation or into a constitution. But it should be one word that you impute into it should be such as are incapable of having many meanings. The court said that, in my understanding, that it did not say that you have to attach or or show. Say you should have read up to. Now, again, another point that was determined was the question of nationality. Again, another point was, what are the issues that are relevant here? If you plead an issue in your pleadings and you don't lead evidence on it, it says it amounts to no issue. Even if it is a matter so relevant, so big as election petition, presidential election petition, they find point of law relating to pleadings, evidence, and weight to be attached to evidence, and then burden of proof. The point is shifts. The burden of proof shift still lies the same. Again, another point that I would take very seriously was that the judgment of the Supreme Court, in the 2015 elections on the card reader and the value and use of the card reader and the import and purport of the card reader still remains the same as it was in 2015 election, because I believe somehow that if the Electoral Act, because an attempt was made by the National Assembly in one of the proposals to address this question, if that law had come into place, if the legislature had brought it in time, if there were no impurities in the second, in the first transmission or passage that was sent to the president and it was assented to, this question would have been addressed. The question of the value of the card reader, electronic transmission of results, electronic voting, and all those issues. You remember, one of the matters that arose during this third transmission was that there was a provision for electronic voting. And I came on this program, on your platform, and on many platforms, and drew attention of the Nigerian people to the fact that what was passed and what was passed was simply correction of the sections that Mr. President drew attention that were incorrect. And those sections, as passed, were transmitted to the president. And it was assumed by the National Assembly that the president ought to have entered and corrected and merged the third version with the second version. And I submitted, and Mr. President and the executive submitted, that it is not part of the functions of the legislature when you have a bill to incorporate the previous submission with the new submission and make a thing, because the president or a governor only assents or declines assent. He cannot add comma, apostrophe, or anything to a bill. Now, these are all the points of law that emerged on this judgment. And the judges, I've already said, referred to the cases, the celebrated cases, the one of Akwa Ibom State, Emmanuel against Umana, Udom Emmanuel, the governor now, against Umana, a governorship candidate of the APC then. They referred to the Wike's case. They made reference to the Atiku Abubakar's case in the previous. They made a case to the Amechi's case. That all this, since the law has not changed, the judgment of the court will not change, because they even went to the celebrated decisions of the most cerebral justices of the Supreme Court, even those of blessed memories, because the point of law they raised and led, the fine erudite submissions of law based on principles that were laid down by Lord Denning and other justices of the masters of the roll of England and have not changed. So it was a very, very erudite, and these are fine points of law which should be used in teaching and making Nigerian judges and the legislature to know that they have a big job to do.
They really do. As Justice Fatai pointed out in the Awolowo and Shagari case in 1979, a clumsily worded section. It has been the bane of many an election petition. But I have to just digress slightly and take you to your new role as the presidential advisor for the Niger Delta. What is your advice regarding the current situation? Their plans, apparently, well, reportedly, to remove and replace the current coordinator for the Presidential Amnesty Program. Those plans have been met with some stiff resistance and threats, but there are equally other voices clamoring for the removal of Charles Dokubo. Where do you stand?
I'm not to speak on matters like that. I'm to speak on matters that relate to the development of the Niger Delta and where do we go from here. Oil will soon not be important. Oil is, there are many alternatives to oil. How do we prepare Nigeria for life without oil now? What development strategies do we put in place to make sure that there is peace in the Niger Delta? Now, there is the amnesty program, which is catering for persons who took up arms at that time and were profiled and educated and trained in many matters. They are being sustained. A new group of persons may have emerged between 2009 and 2019 when amnesty program, they have grown and they are in the area. What kind of attention should be given to them to make sure that they do not carry arms and that oil production is not affected? That's my brief, and that's what we do. What are the kind of investments that can be done in the Niger? What are the kind of agricultural alternatives that should be done in the Niger Delta? There is the complaint that there is no, that the oil, the soil is impacted, and so many things cannot grow. But the soil in Saudi Arabia, in Malaysia, in other countries are impacted, and yet palms are growing there, dates and other things. What are the kind of new seeds, working with the National Seed Council, that should be improved and planted there so that while we get oil out, there are also things that can grow? What are the species of fish that should be growing in this area? Now, there is the question of the alternative economy. It's not just for the Niger Delta. How will Nigeria, what are the alternatives that will sustain Nigeria if oil ceases to be important? I'm sure you are seeing, yeah. So those are all the things that we are thinking about, and I will not only concentrate on this, and then making sure that funds meant for Niger Delta development programs are properly invested in that.
Well, Senator Enang, we have less than a minute to go, and I hope you will respond to this question quickly. You know, it's a slightly personal question. I mean, you were Senior Special Assistant on National Assembly Matters. Now you've been moved to Niger Delta Affairs. Do you miss your former position? Quickly, you know, or it's a question of wherever the master sends me, I go?
I have been in the National Assembly for 20 years, and I was a member of the House of Representatives from 1999 to 2011. 2011, I was elected to the Senate, and I served to 2015. From 2015 to 2019, I was advisor to the President on National Assembly Affairs. That job ought to have ended by the 29th, but I was asked to continue that job until all the ministers were cleared. But I was given an appointment letter that started me on May 29th.
We don't have more time.